Hey guys, I'm really upset about this whole Ukraine thing and how it's being handled. I got a lot of friends and loved ones over there, and these are just a bunch of freaking cool people that are enjoying their lives, and you have these monsters, and I equate it with Hitler, that are just coming through and ruining their lives. Right, Troy?
Yeah, I don't get it either. I mean, by the time we're at 2022, which we are currently, it doesn't seem like there should be a war anywhere for anything. The old concept of land grab, seems to be so archaic.
Well, it's 18th century land grab in a 21st century world.
Right. And that's dangerous, right? Because instead of sticks and stones, now we've got nuclear bombs, which, by the way, Putin more or less threatened last week. Did you hear that?
Oh, no, he threatened that he's doing the nuclear option.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean global nuclear option. They have local nuclear option.
Yeah.
And the thing about this is that, the Russian soldiers are, I've got a friend of mine, Igor, and Igor, love you, brother. And he lives in the Ukraine with his beautiful wife, Svetlana, and their kids. And he told me, we talked today on the phone, and he was like, he met up with he goes to the same bakery every morning, and it was still running, and they're in Kiev. And he goes, there was Russian soldiers sitting with Ukraine soldiers, and he's like, what are you guys sitting there talking together? He goes, they don't want to do this. All the attacks are coming from the air.
Yeah, it's interesting that whole region, right? The languages are very, very similar, if not the same, right? There's a ton of Russians in Ukraine and vice versa. I mean,
they are Russians. I mean, it's the same,
basically
it's
Russians,
the same
right?
thing. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
And
here, let me put it to you this way, and everybody out there, it's like if you're in California and you're in Riverside or L.A., that's what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
You speak the same language.
You speak the same language, and I've heard more than one story about soldiers talking to each other, just like off the cuff, like being very cordial in a war zone, which is just bizarre. But I think Putin is, he's very calculating. He's an old KGB guy. I think he wants to bring Russia back into a Soviet Union type situation.
Okay, so that's a great point, because this is like Czechoslovakia in 1938, okay?
Right.
It was that important. But this place is even more important, okay?
And for a lot of reasons, right?
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget, Russia, Putin, went into that area in 2014, right?
Yeah.
They went in there, they annexed Crimea,
True.
and they took that over, which is sitting right in the Black Sea, by the way, which is a waterway, which is important to any country to have trade.
Which Russia doesn't have access to the Black Sea from their boundaries.
Correct, yeah. So they got it, and Crimea is a beautiful spot for that, and Georgia's right to the, I think, east of that. So,
well, you got Belarus, Lithuania, Poland. You've got Moldova. You've got that whole area is going to be devastated. But here's what's interesting to me. I'm a big beer drinker, right? And,
Really?
And yeah, nobody knew that.
Oh,
I'm sure. But
no.
the Ukraine for the EU. First of all, they're the second biggest landmass out there. But for the EU, they produce more produce than anybody else out there. They produce like 68% of the produce, but they produce over 80% of the barley and malt. So your beer prices are going to go way out of the frickin' chute. Because guess what? If you don't have tractors in the field and you have tanks in the fields, what's going to happen? Right?
So they're basically the breadbasket of Europe?
100%.
Ukraine is? Really?
100%.
Okay, yeah.
And the other deal is I mean, the oil is a big deal. But when you look at that, you're hurting all these countries. Okay.
Remember the butterfly effect?
Yeah, precisely.
You get a little pebble in some pond in the middle of nowhere, and it affects the entire world.
The whole ripple
and we
effect.
certainly have that now. We've got that with climate change. We've got that with any geopolitical situation. There are all sorts of situations that affect each and every one of us. Our beer's more expensive, Hammer, right? And our fuel is going to be more expensive, because we'll talk about the fuel with Russia. They supply 40% of all of Europe with natural gas, right? And they've got two old pipelines, right? They've got two old, inefficient pipelines. Well, actually more than two, but two of them go through Ukraine, and a couple of them go through Belarus, right? And if they're old, inefficient, and not working well, And by the way, they also, Ukraine and Crimea charge a really huge tariff to bring that fuel across their country. So what a better way to reduce your cost than to say, why don't we just take over Ukraine?
Okay, so if the Gazprom is what it's called over there is full and it's shipping through Ukraine.
Gazprom,
50,
right?
yeah, Gazprom.
Yeah.
50% of all fuel going to the EU, it goes to the Ukraine.
Right.
Okay.
And Gazprom, by the way, is a state-owned Russian entity
Right.
that is an enormous conglomerate of gas and fuel. Speaking of the fuel, right? I'm just kind of skipping around a little bit, but there's what do they call that? The the Nord Stream, right?
Yeah.
The Nord Stream runs underneath the Baltic Sea from Russia down to Germany, your
Right.
hometown, right? And now they built a second one called the Nord Stream 2. It parallels the other one. It's all built, it's done, but they do not have permission to run it yet. And what's
Gazprom.
Gazprom owns 50% of the pipeline and
Right.
100% of the gas going through it.
Right.
Is there political reasoning behind wanting to
And
take over Ukraine?
yeah, and how much of that? I mean, listen, Putin is worth, they estimate anywhere from 70 to 250 $billion. And he was this little lowlife in the 80s KGB guy, operative. And when the wall fell and Russia crumbled, him and all the other oligarchs went in and sold off all the assets to Russia.
Correct.
And he's the guy that came out on top.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
He doesn't give a shit about his people.
Yeah, and you hear that, the oligarchs, everybody goes like, what does that mean? You just think maybe it's a rich person, and certainly they are. But like you were saying, when the USSR disbanded, right, it became
Right.
Russia as opposed to Soviet Union in the 1990s, everything was privatized. Not everything, but most of the businesses were privatized. And a few, lucky few, ended up with billions.
Well, the guys that run KGB, they knew where everything was at.
Exactly.
So they could sell it off and,
Right.
and do whatever they
Right.
do. But here's the sad thing about it. The Ukraine, for a lot of you folks out there that don't really know much about that part of the world, Ukraine is like Orange County, California. All right? You got LA to one side, you got Riverside and San Diego the other side. And Russia is LA. All right? And these people are not communists. You know, they are all about a Western way of life.
Right.
And now there's 44 million people that live in the Ukraine. And it was funny, I was watching all these different news agencies today before this podcast, and NBC, CBS, they were all saying, yeah, that it's going to displace like, 60,000 to 150,000 people. And then Fox goes, no, about 600,000. But then if you look at Polish television and German television, they're telling you it's 6 million to 20 million. Okay? That's the real number.
And that's an interesting point too, Cameron. Aside from the death and destruction that's already going on and taking place, the humanitarian issue that is associated with this is going to be, I think, lasting well beyond.
Oh, it's generational.
Bullets. Yeah, it is
This will be
generational
generational.
for sure. Yeah.
What I want to know is why the hell is the U.S. government still buying 40% of our fuel from Russia when this is going on?
Well, that's
they should
changing.
cut that thing off.
Yeah.
Listen, we got the Keystone Pipeline. We can frack. We can do whatever. I mean, listen, and I'm not about politics, but I'm going to tell you something. The last president, we were independent when it came to our
Right.
fuel and, our economy and that side of it.
And still, a lot of people are still wondering, why did Russia do this? What's going on? I have my own opinions about it. Everybody does. Putin has his own concept of it. I think there's three real reasons why Russia is invading Ukraine. The first one is the Donbass region, which is they call it. There's an area to the southeast of Ukraine that has a large amount of people who are faithful to Russia. They are called separatists, and Putin claims that they said we're being attacked either economically or physically by the rest of Ukraine. Hey, Russia, come help us. We need help. That was his excuse in the very beginning to enter Russia, which is BS. Secondly, Ukraine, as you mentioned already, Hammer, is leaning democratic. They're leaning, away from a totalitarian type government, right? And Russia hates that. In
Absolutely.
fact, they're not a member of NATO yet, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but they just applied. And had they been NATO already, if Ukraine would have been NATO right now, the United States would be in a war as well. It'd be World War III
Well, it wouldn't
right
have happened.
now,
It wouldn't
period.
happen.
And the third reason is what we're already talking about, was the gas and oil.
But the thing about getting into NATO, there's a couple things about NATO, okay? Number one, NATO's bullshit. Because if you look at NATO, U.S. pays for 74, 78% of frickin' NATO, basically, all right? All these other countries pitch in this little puny amount. We should call it not the UN. We should call it
USN.
U.S. saving your ass. Okay, that's what we should call it. All right. Number two, we don't have to let them into the UN. It's just wrong. Okay, we're a big country. U.S. goes, don't do that. I mean, the guy sitting in the White House, I don't care who the hell you are, you dumbass. Just tell him this is what's going to happen. And if you do that, we're the strongest, biggest country in the world, and we have the most might. So act like it and deliver it.
And stick to it.
And stick to it. Guess what? The White House is right now screwing the people in the UK, or in Ukraine. And I will tell you, you can agree with me or disagree with me, but we don't need to be losing souls like we did with Nazi Germany and the Jewish people losing 6 million people. We need to stop this thing now before it gets crazy.
Yeah.
So, guys, I want to hear from you. I want to know what your comments are and how you feel about this. And
Hey, by the way, did you know the Taekwondo Association of the World just took away the black belt from Putin? One of his few sanctions. I'm not kidding. That fucker. You got to get him from all sides.
yeah, you're going to get it from all sides. But guess what, guys? Listen, let's support the Ukraine people. They're beautiful people. And I want to hear from you guys. And Putin, you probably never see this, but bro, just go play with something else.
And
man.
as they
Leave this
said,
shit alone.
as they said on Snake Island, hey Russia, go fuck yourself.
Yeah. Peace out.